In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro delves deeply into the recent bold military action authorized by President Donald Trump against Iran's nuclear facilities, exploring its implications for American foreign policy, Israel's security, and the broader geopolitical landscape. Joined by key guests, including Caroline Glick, International Affairs Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister, Jonathan Shanzer of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and Professor Victor Davis Hanson, Shapiro provides a detailed analysis of the strike's execution, its aftermath, and what lies ahead. The episode opens with a vivid description of the airstrike carried out by the United States, targeting Iran's nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. President Trump's use of B-2 stealth bombers equipped with massive ordnance penetrators was highlighted as a demonstration of American military precision and power. Contrary to some skepticism about the effectiveness of the strike, satellite imagery and intelligence reports suggest that the facilities were either completely destroyed or rendered unusable. The analogy to the Death Star exhaust port from Star Wars was used humorously to illustrate how the Iranians' design flaw allowed the U.S. to deliver a devastating blow deep underground. Shapiro emphasized that this strike was not a reckless escalation, but a calculated, targeted operation that reshaped American foreign policy by decisively addressing a long-standing threat. The president's transparency, particularly through his Truth Social posts, was underscored as a rare example of clear communication in international affairs, dispelling rumors of hidden agendas or confusion about U.S. intentions. Caroline Glick provided an insider's perspective on the significance of the strike for Israel. She praised the historic partnership between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, noting that their coordinated efforts have fundamentally altered the Middle East's strategic balance. Israel's military had already been actively degrading Iran's proxy forces and missile capabilities, and the U.S. strike complemented these efforts by eliminating the nuclear threat at its source. Glick stressed that Israel's goals remain focused on neutralizing Iran's military and ballistic missile capacities rather than pursuing regime change. The ongoing conflict in Gaza and the broader campaign against Hamas were also discussed, with Israel aiming to secure the release of hostages and dismantle Hamas's military infrastructure. The establishment of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, bypassing Hamas's control over aid, was highlighted as a strategic move to weaken Hamas's grip on power. The episode also touched on the reactions of regional players such as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, and Turkey, many of whom privately supported the strike despite public expressions of concern. Russia's muted response was noted, reflecting its own reluctance to see Iran acquire nuclear weapons. The United Nations' condemnation of the strike was criticized as hypocritical, given the organization's historical inaction regarding Iran's nuclear ambitions and terrorism sponsorship. Shapiro examined the global responses, contrasting supportive statements from countries like Argentina, Australia, and Canada with condemnations from China and left-leaning international actors. China's call for a ceasefire, particularly directed at Israel, was portrayed as ironic given China's own destabilizing actions worldwide and its heavy reliance on Iranian oil. Domestically, the episode highlighted bipartisan support for the strike, with Republican leaders like Speaker Mike Johnson and Senators John Thune and Ted Cruz praising the decisive action. Even some Democrats, such as Senator John Fetterman and former Biden aide Jamie Metzel, acknowledged the necessity of degrading Iran's nuclear capabilities. This rare moment of cross-party consensus was framed as a testament to the clarity and urgency of the threat posed by Iran. However, Shapiro also addressed the constitutional and pragmatic objections raised by some members of Congress, including Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, who criticized the strike for lacking congressional authorization. Shapiro refuted these claims by explaining the president's commander-in-chief powers and the limited scope of the strike, distinguishing it from a full-scale war. He argued that the War Powers Resolution does not prohibit such targeted military actions, and that historical precedents abound for presidents acting decisively without explicit congressional declarations of war. The podcast explored Iran's precarious position following the strike. Reports of Ayatollah Khamenei's seclusion in a bunker and the regime's internal instability were discussed. Iran's threats to close the Strait of Hormuz were analyzed as strategically foolish, given the global economic repercussions and the potential for a strong international military response, including from China, which depends heavily on oil passing through the strait. Shapiro and his guests noted that Iran's options are limited. While the regime may attempt retaliatory attacks through its proxy groups or sleeper cells, its military and missile capabilities have been significantly degraded. The episode underscored the importance of vigilance against terrorism, but rejected the notion that the strike would inevitably lead to a broader war or American ground involvement in Iran. Professor Victor Davis Hanson provided a historical lens, comparing the strike to previous U.S. military actions and emphasizing its precision and limited scope. He contrasted it with the prolonged conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, noting that this operation was a focused effort to neutralize a specific threat rather than an open-ended nation-building mission. Hanson praised President Trump's courage and strategic acumen, highlighting the restoration of American credibility and deterrence after years of perceived weakness under previous administrations. He also discussed the broader implications for the Middle East, where Israel's newfound strength and the weakening of Iran's proxies have shifted the regional balance of power. This shift, Hanson suggested, could pave the way for expanded peace agreements, including the potential normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The episode concluded with reflections on the future trajectory of the conflict and the region. Shapiro and his guests agreed that the immediate threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon has been significantly diminished, but the situation remains volatile. The ultimate fate of the Iranian regime is uncertain, with some speculation that any regime change would likely come from within the military rather than popular uprising. The prospects for peace in the Middle East were cautiously optimistic, contingent on Israel's continued military success and the United States' sustained support. The Abraham Accords and broader normalization efforts were seen as achievable goals, especially if Iran's influence continues to wane. Finally, the episode underscored the importance of American strength and resolve in maintaining global stability. President Trump's strike was framed as a defining moment that reasserted U.S. leadership and sent a clear message to adversaries worldwide, including China and Russia, about America's willingness to defend its core interests decisively.